Let's go to the Philippines. For over 300 years, Spain colonized the Philippines using Manila Bay as their great seaport. They traded silver and rich spices with other countries surrounding Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. In exchange for gold, the Spaniards gave Filipinos Jesus Christ. And that is why the Spanish called the people Filipinos. It was after King Philip, or Felipe, of Spain, Felipe II of Spain. That is why Filipinos have Spanish surnames like Bautista and Calderon, or Marquez and Santos. The Spanish connection, however, is going to come to an end in the Spanish-American War in 1898, when America wanted to control the Philippines. And the reason why is because the Philippines had these rubber trees that American industry so desperately wanted. Rubber. Unknown to the Filipinos, though, the Treaty of Paris, through the Treaty of Paris in the war, in what is known as the Spanish-American War of 1898, Spain sold the Philippines to the United States for $20 million, thus ending over 300 years of Spanish colonization. The Filipinos did not know this. The Filipinos were celebrating their independence from Spain on June 12, 1898, and they declared Emilio Aguinaldo as president. They had been fighting Spain prior to the American intervention, and Emilio Aguinaldo's troops had captured Luzon, the Philippines' major island, against the Spanish before the U.S. military arrived. Now, when Major Dewey's naval victory of the Spanish occurred, Aguinaldo appreciated the U.S. support, and he thought he had a de facto alliance with the United States. He then issued a proclamation declaring Filipino independence. But the Americans refused to meet with quote-unquote savages. And they told the Filipinos to retreat to Manila or face forcible action. So the Filipinos felt betrayed when the Treaty of Paris handed over the Philippines to the United States. And on February 4th, 1899, Filipino troops engaged Americans, and it sparked a long and brutal war. Thus, the Filipino-American War began shortly after the United States went to colonize the Philippines. So, of course, in the U.S. history books, it is known as the Philippine Insurrection. And that Philippine Insurrection, instead of calling it how the Filipinos called it, the Filipino War for Independence, this war is going to last from 1898 to 1902. And it is estimated that some 34,000 Filipino soldiers lost their lives. But what is more important are the civilians that had died directly or indirectly as a result of the war. Most of them due to a cholera epidemic that broke out near its end when the United States devastated the country. Civilians are going to be crowded into concentration camps where as many as 200,000 died. Now, whether you were a civilian or a soldier, American troops viewed every Filipino with racial hatred simply because of their dark skin, and so American soldiers pulled their trigger on sight. And before the military imposed censorship on war news, reporters sent out clips of U.S. atrocities. One reporter exclaimed, "American troops have been relentless, have killed to exterminate men, women, and children, prisoners and captives, active insurgents and suspected people from lads of 10 and up." Another reported that soldiers were ordered to shoot and kill everyone over age 10. In California, the Stockton newspaper defended the slaughter. There has been too much hypocrisy about this Philippine business. Let us all be frank, we do not want the Filipinos. We do want the Philippines. All of our troubles in the annexation matter of the Philippines have been caused by the presence of the Filipinos. The more of them killed, the better. It seems harsh, but they must yield before the superior race. Now, the brutality and overt racism led many in America, especially progressive women, to rebel and protest. Let's watch a film clip from a documentary entitled The Spanish-American War, the Philippines and Filipino Genocide.
In the Philippines, Aguinaldo's insurgents had no promises of independence, no Teller Amendment. They continued to resist. Within 2 months, they had killed and wounded 500 U.S. soldiers.
Why is it that the American outlook is blacker now than it has been since the beginning of the war? The whole population of the islands sympathizes with the insurgents. The sooner the people of the United States find out that the people of the Philippines do not wish to be governed by us, the better. Harper's Weekly, June 1899.
The Anti-Imperialist League that had begun some months before grew in membership. It's very interesting, especially a number of American women got involved in this. They did not yet have suffrage. They saw the Filipinos essentially as having their problem. That is to say, they were being governed without their having anything to say about it.
Among the most vocal of anti-imperialist women were members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Again and again has my blood boiled at the hundreds of American saloons being established throughout our new possessions. And shame of shames, our military authorities in the Philippines have introduced the open and official sanction of prostitution. Bessie Scoville, Women's Christian Temperance Union.
What really upset WCTU members were the reports of sexually transmitted diseases. And they were just appalled to find out that boys who they described as pure boys had left their homes and their loving mothers and their strong values and went to the Philippines and instead came home sick, diseased, depraved.
Founder of the Anti-Imperialist League, Edward Atkinson, published pamphlets on venereal disease and sent them to troops in the Philippines.
Atkinson believed that one of the consequences of going into the career of empire was that traditional American principles, such as freedom of speech, would no longer hold. And sure enough, the Postmaster General had the pamphlets seized, and so they never reached the Philippines. And Atkinson was able to go to the public then and say, you see, this is what happens. If we seize the Philippines and go and become an imperialist power, we'll no longer have our freedoms.
In August 1899, the U.S. commander in Manila requested 60,000 reinforcements, quadrupling the size of U.S. forces in the Philippines. Aguinaldo ordered his officers to begin a guerrilla war.
It involved men without uniforms, so they would be able to fade into civilian populations very, very quickly. It involved surprise attacks, raids, without warning. Some of the Filipinos would even wear women's clothing at times to be able to get behind American lines and then hit from the back.
And the way the fighting went on was just utterly alien to the American kids at the beginning of the 20th century in the Philippines, just as it was to the American kids in the late 1960s in Vietnam. And whenever you send an 18 or a 19-year-old out into the world and give them a gun and tell them to go and kill the enemy and to hate the enemy, you're going to have problems. You're going to have the kind of thing that happened at Wounded Knee, or the kind of thing that happened in the Philippines with the American troops torturing their prisoners in the most, you don't want to ever even think about it, ways.
American brutality in the Philippines brought an unexpected supporter to the anti-imperialist movement, William Randolph Hearst.
Letters that were sent to him from American soldiers talked about killing the Filipinos, who they called Indians oftentimes, connecting it to the Indian Wars in the United States. And I think Hearst started seeing that perhaps the whole Spanish-American War was a misadventure, that what possibly worked in Cuba, getting Spain out, was turning out to be disastrous in the Pacific with the Philippines.
Just break the news to Mother. She knows how dear I love her, and tell her not to wait for me, for I'm not coming home.
Talk about dead Indians. Why, they're lying everywhere. The trenches are full of them. Theodore Conley, a Kansas regiment.
Last night, one of our boys was found shot and his stomach cut open. Immediately, orders were received to burn the town and kill every native in sight. I am probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun on some dark skin and pull the trigger. A.A. Barnes, 3rd U.S. Artillery.
I don't believe the people in the United States understand the condition of things here. Even the Spanish are shocked. I have seen enough to almost make me ashamed to call myself an American, an anonymous soldier.
The body count in the Philippines worried President McKinley. 3,000 Americans and 15,000 Filipinos had been killed. U.S. generals in Manila were ordered to censor reporters' dispatches that contained any unfavorable news.
American reporters in the Philippines blamed the generals, not the president, for this censorship and their inability to get a lot of this news out. So by the early part of 1900, McKinley was in much better shape politically than he should have been, given the number of casualties and the amount of atrocities that were going on in the Philippine Revolution.